Everybody's had some adventures. Everybody's had a few close calls. Everybody's got a story. What's yours?
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 13, part 2, or part 2 of Cool Story with David J. MacNeil. Thank you so much for listening. To quote the Golden Girls show theme song, thank you for being a friend. In part 1, I chatted with the voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Mike Ross, about his early days in broadcasting and the tenacity and hard work it took to land him the coveted job as the Toronto Maple Leafs announcer. In part 2, we discuss what it is like to be one of the very exclusive members of the NHL Playoff Bubble. We also discuss the benefits of speaking a second language, in particular speaking French in Canada. And finally, we shared a few more stories about growing up in Ottawa. So let's get down to it. Here is part 2 of my conversation with the voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Mike Ross. So talk to me now about this bubble you work in. So so you get a call and they tell you, here's what we're going to do. We're going to play in 2 arenas. One of them is yours. Giddy up. You got the gig. You get to announce all the games now. So you're announcing, the home team is a different team every night now. First of all, what's it like to work in the NHL now in that capacity? And what is it like to function within, like, in and out of that bubble? Like, how do you come in? Do you go through, do you get sprayed when you come? You know what? Like, we don't know what happens, So, what do they do to make sure that you don't bring sickness into the bubble?
The first thing I would say is, I commend the NHL and the 3 levels of government health officials that worked on establishing the protocol.
Yeah.
Because the NHL's gone through this whole thing to this point without a single positive test. And the only way that happens is the rules that were set up in order to work. And there clearly wasn't a lot of room for error. But they've done a tremendous job in setting it up. And the people going, those living in the bubble and those coming in and out of the bubble also follow the rules and bought into it, right? Because the biggest thing, think back to the NBA when they first set it up and guys were going out to bars or strip clubs and it's like, no, you can't do that or else this thing doesn't work. Like there's not a lot of margin for error. So for me, I'm not living in the bubble, so I haven't been at a hotel for a month, which I think the people that I've talked to... Was there discussion
that you might have to do that at any point?
Initially, there was discussion. They weren't sure how they were going to really set that up.
Yeah.
So the assumption was, everybody's going to be in the bubble. And then they came to us and said, no, what they've devised was a plan where the arena it's been sort of divvied up into zones. And if you're not in the bubble, you are assigned to your zone, and that's the only place you can go. So where normally when I'm in my booth up atop the building and I need to use the restroom, I come out of the booth, hang a left, walk to the end of the press box, and there's a restroom there. Well, now I can't do that because that end of the press box is for people who are in another zone. I'm in zone 3, so I'm permitted to come in the building, get on the elevator right next there to the testing zone, go up to my booth, and then at the end of the night, go back. I can use the bathroom on the 4th floor on the other side of the building. So you're holding it a lot. Where you normally would be able to socialize and everything else in the press box, that's not happening. So the first thing was, you're going to be given a credential and there's a number on it. That's your zone. That's the only place you're allowed to be.
That all makes total sense. Yeah.
And so when I get there, and anybody who is in and out in the morning, when you get to the arena in the morning, afternoon, whatever, you go through the main gate 1, and there's someone who meets you there and checks your credential and gives you a temperature check and goes over a list of symptoms with you. And once you've passed that, then you go through security, and then you walk straight to the testing zone, and you sit down, and a nurse sticks a swab up your nose, both nostrils, and you do the nostril test. And you do that every single day that you work. So I've had that test now probably 25 times. So I've done 30 games, and yeah, probably on 25 different dates. And from there, you go straight up to your workspace, and that's it. Like, you normally, if I were doing a Leaf game, you're going in gate 2, which is on Bay Street. You go downstairs and you see the media relations guys, and then you go over to the media center and you have dinner with like 45 other people, and then you might go and walk the concourse, go to the team store, up to the press box, and go see this broadcaster and that broadcaster. None of that's happening. None of it. And the reason honestly that I think it's worked so well is everybody's done what they're supposed to do. So it's very rigorous, and it's very well enforced. They have sort of health protocol people that are watching and keeping an eye out for things. They have limits on how many people can be in an elevator. You have to have a mask on. They provided everybody with cloth masks or medical masks, and the rules are quite strict, but quite manageable, and it hasn't been very difficult.
So part of your job is to be the announcer, but the cheerleader for the home team. How does it work when neither of the teams on the ice might even be teams that you respect? Even who knows? Depending on,
you know what? That's a great question, and one that I sort of struggled with myself when I first started talking to my boss at MLSE and say, how do we approach this? And she said, basically,
cheer for the Bruins,
right?
It's Scotiabank Arena.
Okay, so all of a sudden, I have to go from the regular season where I would announce a Bruins goal like this: Bruins goal scored by number 88, David Pastrnak, assisted by number 63, Brad Marchand, and number 37, Patrice Bergeron. Pastrnak for Marchand and Bergeron at 14:52. To now having to be super enthusiastic and pumped up because I'm the home announcer for the Boston Bruins.
Yeah.
So I really wrestled with that one. But basically what we were told was, number one, pump the tires of the home team. Number two, essentially we're Switzerland. So you don't go deadpan on anybody. And so if you're doing Bruins Carolina and the Bruins are the home team, then you're giving the Bruins a little bit more pep. Yeah. A little bit more energy. But she said, essentially treat it like you would a World Junior game where it's Switzerland and Kazakhstan. Mm-hmm. And you're just being happy for everybody. And so, at first, trying to figure out how am I going to be energetic for the Boston Bruins or the Montreal Canadiens, and it's like that would never ever happen. Yeah. But what I had to understand and what was made very clear to me was, this is an NHL event, and even though it's in our building, even though you're the Maple Leafs announcer, even though the woman calling the game for me, directing the game from a game presentation standpoint, is my boss at the Maple Leafs games, we're not Maple Leafs right now.
Yeah.
Unless the Maple Leafs are the home team. And then it was great because I could just be myself. But
Yeah.
but initially it was trying to understand how we're going to go about doing it. And the NHL, they were wrestling with it as well, in that they have all the video presentations and all the bells and whistles that they wanted to incorporate in the production that they had to figure out pretty quickly how to do. And I think they've done a fantastic job. I really admire all the production people, the game presentation people from the NHL for putting this together and trying to bring as much normalcy as we've been able to bring for the players and for the coaches.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that's ultimately that's what it was about.
Yeah, and people are going to be watching these games in 30 years on ESPN Classic or on whatever, iteration of MLSE, has for looking back on classic games and stuff in the future. I mean, and it has to feel like an NHL game, like you said. You can't half-ass it.
Right. And it's an NHL game in a very different time. There's no doubt about that. But as I said to somebody who was asking me about, what's the coolest thing about having been one of the announcers for, NHL playoffs in the bubble. And I said, strictly from a selfish PA announcer standpoint, I can look back at this and say that in the summer of 2020, I was the public address announcer, the home public address announcer for 4 of the original 6 teams, right? I was the home announcer for the Rangers, for the Canadiens, for the Bruins, and for my Maple Leafs, plus all the other teams that came to town.
Yeah.
But to have that, I mean, having done a World Juniors, in fact, I did 2 World Juniors. That's one thing. I was Canada's voice, sure. And we were certainly more enthusiastic about anything Canada. But, in a tournament like that, you're the announcer for Canada, for the US, for Sweden, Finland, et cetera, et cetera. But to sit there and say that this summer I got to be in the arena, I was one of 4 announcers in either of the bubbles, to be in the building, witnessing it firsthand, and to announce for 4 of the original 6 teams. I mean, that to me, that's a big feather in my cap. That's something I'm really proud of, and I know I'm going to be proud of for a long, long time.
Absolutely. And that's, especially for, having grown up in there were more teams than that. We weren't original 6 kids, but certainly still growing up during that era in the 70s and 80s and stuff. I mean, the original 6 is just,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I got a lot of help from other guys around the league. I talked to a lot of them before the tournament started and just got a little bit of an idea of what they do. Is there anything that you want me to do? I mean, I'm not going to replicate you. I don't think I should. I don't think I want to. And I don't think you want me to. But I got so much guidance, from guys like Michel Lacroix in Montreal, who sent me the format of how he announces. So here's the order I go in. Here's where you do French and then you do English, and it goes in this order. And
nice.
It was all about trying to make it feel like a Canadiens home game, or like a Bruins home game, or like a Carolina home game. And that's why I consider myself really lucky that the community, we call it the PA Brotherhood. And we have, there's 31 jobs in the NHL, right? There'll be 32 next year, but there's probably about 26 or 27 of us that are in a Facebook group together. We're constantly talking to each other, constantly sharing ideas. And
that's awesome.
Everybody was on board to help out the guys who are going to be working this tournament. And in a gig that is sort of individualistic and can be, there can certainly be egos.
Yeah.
I've never encountered that with these guys. Everybody's just happy to look out for the other guy. And I think it's because we also know how vulnerable we are in our jobs, right? None of us have 5-year deals.
Mm-hmm.
You could be out at any point. And we want our gigs to last as long as we can. So guys are always willing to help each other out. Excuse me. And that's what happened in preparing for this. So many of the guys either reached out or took my call and helped me get ready to be able to work for their teams and make it as close to the real thing as I could.
Yeah, well, that's a great attitude that everybody's got. You know, the rising tide floats all boats.
Right.
View of it, you know.
Yeah.
It works well for everybody. Everybody should benefit from that kind of sharing that knowledge and stuff, and it's good for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's amazing too. I mean, too, because you're on, you want to do this as long as you can, but it certainly doesn't hurt to be on the radar of other teams and other people appreciate what you can offer. That's nice too when others see your value and see you bring value to their games
for
as
sure.
They play in this weird circumstance.
That's why I've, and you and I had sort of discussed this off air, and that was how bilingualism, French and English, was really instrumental in getting my foot in the door with MLSE to begin with, in doing that World Junior Championship. If I'm not bilingual, I'm not getting that job. And so the fact that I was perfectly bilingual opened up doors for me, certainly in Ottawa, but even more so once I get to Toronto and get that first World Junior Championship. And the doors that opened for me after that, Pan Am Games, Invictus Games, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's been huge.
You know, when I left Ottawa in 1995, a part of me thought, well, all of my years of speaking French, of going to French schools, all that, it was amazing. Unfortunately, it won't be very helpful in Toronto. And I was dead wrong on that, because there's just so many opportunities where it doesn't matter if there aren't a lot of French speakers in the city of Toronto. There are some, but there aren't, as many as a lot of other Canadian cities. But services have to be offered in French. And then on top of that, too, you're in a big city where there's not a lot of people who are, you become a much bigger fish.
Yep.
When you're bilingual, and I that's why I encourage so many people these days that if you're not going to a French school or to go out take French immersion or whatever, but learn a second language, and especially in Canada, like if you can, you've got the time and the will or whatever, man, it makes a world of difference if you can speak French and you live in Canada. You can barely work in Ottawa if you don't speak French. You can, but any really great jobs or great opportunities that come along are gonna hinge on whether or not you can speak French and how well you can speak it. That's why it can be difficult if you stick to your guns and you're like, nah, being Anglophone is enough. It doesn't really work that way in Ottawa. Yeah, and it's just helpful anywhere you go beyond that. Being able to speak a second language.
It can be enough. It can be enough to get by, but why limit yourself, right? Why?
It's also a glass ceiling.
And for me, being down here, when the first time I lost my job in radio, being that I spoke French, being that there are French school boards down here, and my wife works. She's a vice principal at the French public school system. That gave me knowledge that there were jobs there. There were jobs within that school board that I've always been able to sort of have as a fallback plan if things didn't work out. But if I just abandoned that French way back when and just said, when I went to high school, I didn't want to go to French high school. I wanted to go to Glebe Collegiate. Mm-hmm. My parents said, no, you're staying in French school. And I didn't want to buy into it because a lot of my cool friends were going to other schools. But as it turns out, It was the right decision, and I never forgot that.
Yeah, we were talking about that the other day. Not long ago, I sent my parents an email and I thanked them for that. I said it made a world of difference growing up that way. And I have all kinds of opportunities that wouldn't have presented themselves to me if we hadn't gone that route. And that was all because they pushed for that and they thought it was important at a time when it might not have been that popular a choice. So going back to the bubble that you now function with,
La
and
bulle.
the NHL playoffs, which will, the Stanley Cup playoff is not too far away. What do you think that experience is going to be like for you and for the fans around the world to see a team win in this different environment? How do you think that's going to play out?
So for me, from a very selfish place, if the Maple Leafs aren't in the Stanley Cup final, I'm glad I'm not being called on to announce the final. Because when the bubbles were first announced, it was announced very early that Edmonton was going to get the conference finals and the Stanley Cup final.
Okay.
So I knew from the very beginning that if the Maple Leafs went to the Stanley Cup final, I wasn't going to be announcing that final. And that was just crushed me.
Yeah.
Because if the Maple Leafs are going to win that first Stanley Cup since 67, I better damn well be in that arena. Like there's no way for me to fathom not announcing that.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of the guys, announcers around the league sort of felt that way about not being in the bubble announcing for their teams. Like they would have liked to have been able to come to Toronto and go to Edmonton and announce for their teams. So I think I'd have that same envy. And I to a certain degree still do. To be able to have that on your resume that you announced for a Stanley Cup final. Mm-hmm. I've done a Memorial Cup in 1999 with the 67s. I did that one, which was phenomenal. But to have a Stanley Cup on your resume would be tremendous. That's not going to happen, but I'm going to watch along with all, the rest of the fans. And aside from a few differences in protocol or how they run the protocol in Edmonton, because it's a different local health authority, different provincial health authority. Yeah. It's really a mirror of what we've seen so far. So I would imagine that there'll be a few more bells and whistles for television. Yeah. But I think it's going to be exciting. If anything, the absence of a crowd in the arena has allowed us to hear the raw, real emotion of the game from the players and from the coaches, and to hear how that's going to be ratcheted up in a Stanley Cup final. I can't wait. Like that's going to be really, really exciting.
Yeah, it would be. It is interesting to watch those games and hear those games and hear the players calling out for passes and hear conversations with the refs and all that. It does give you a better sense of what it's like to be in the player's head.
Yeah. How many times do you hear people say, that the players they just seem like robots. They're just going through the motions. And now you hear the cheers off a bench on a big hit or on a goal, or when they're calling for a penalty, against the other team. It's absolutely shattered that whole idea that they're just going through the motions. They are not. Yeah. They're invested, and I can't wait to hear what it's going to sound like once we get to a Stanley Cup final. When that they're just that much closer to the finish line and to that ultimate goal of hoisting the cup.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me every time when I think about that, it always reminds me of the big Crosby goal in 2010 and hearing him yell out. Like it's like all the sounds stop for a second. Iggy. Yeah. Yeah. Does that moment, it's seared in my brain.
Absolutely.
Those little moments where you can hear the players and you feel like you're right there, and just with that kind of accuracy, and it's cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things that they've pulled off with this is the TV people that they have working on it, in bringing so many different sights to us through different camera angles, but the sounds and working in the all the sort of nuanced sounds of the game.
Yeah.
Whether it's the blade on the ice, it seems to me like you hear the puck ringing off the post even louder than you've ever heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And the players, I mean, that really is the icing on the cake.
Yeah, and I really like all of the sound effects in the crowd and all that they pumped in, because if nothing else, it's not that I need to be fooled, but the more it sounds like the hockey game I'm familiar with, the better, the more fun it is.
It certainly helped us, like for me.
Yeah.
Because I know that the first couple of games that I did with nobody in the building was like, okay, this is kind of weird. Like, I know that in my booth, it's a soundproof booth for the most part. It's probably about 90%, 95% soundproof.
Yeah.
So normally I don't hear the crowd. I don't hear the buzz of the crowd. Mm. I'll feel it if it's a big goal or something like that, but I wouldn't necessarily hear it. But now to hear like nothing, to feel no vibration or anything like that was really strange. And when they started pumping in the stuff with EA Sports and how they can adjust it to react to certain things happening, like they can hit an effect where the crowd goes a little louder on a save, or when you're announcing a goal and you announce the goal scorer's name and number, and all of a sudden the crowd, the guy hits a button and all of a sudden you're getting a reaction. That really has added not only to the TV experience, but for the experience of the performers. Like it's helped me.
Yeah, no, I think the NHL has done a really good job putting this together, and the MLSE's done a great job. And it's such an honor just to have our building, our staff involved in this project, and something that's going to be, there's going to be an asterisk on this one, but there's also going to be an asterisk on this one. It's going to be a cool one. It's going to be one that we're all going to talk about. And we were there, and the kids who are growing up now, like, they remember that, they're part of it, and it's a big moment in our history. And it's nice when sports are tied into it. It's a unique time in our history.
I'm glad you put it that way. I'm glad you put it that way, because initially there were so many people just poo-pooing the whole idea of sports coming back, and the asterisk was a negative thing that, it's not going to mean, if Montreal or Toronto win a cup, it's not going to mean the same. It's going to have an asterisk on it. And I thought, you know what? Yeah. It's going to have one on it anyway. This whole year has to have an asterisk on it.
Yeah.
But everybody will be starting on the same level playing field, and you go from there. And let's see what we can make of it. And it's one that you're right. We're gonna talk about for a long time. We're gonna think about for a long time. Definitely gonna get a chapter in my book. Yeah. How can it not? But
somebody's going to win a cup. I mean,
that's right.
As Canadian fans, I grew up. I can picture, just a quick aside. I can picture my grandfather driving into the driveway. He lived out in Greenbank area. Now he had a little house that was surrounded by farms, and we'd pull up on a Sunday afternoon in the car, and he'd be sitting out on the driveway on his lawn chair with his can of tobacco and his bottle of Molson, and with the radio on, listening to the Montreal Expos broadcast in French. Mm-hmm. Right. I remember it like it was yesterday. And that was his moment, right? His time to sit back and just have some time to himself. Yep. And then when when there was the lockout, and that team that could have won it all, it was at 94, I believe. Yep. Yeah. Now we Canadian baseball fans always talk about that, the year that could have been. Well, at least this is a year that it wasn't a year that could have been. It's a year that it's going to be. Yeah. There's going to be a Stanley Cup champion, and somebody's going to get to hoist that cup. I'm on that bus. I'm not on the way everything should have been shut down and all that. I think it's great that they were able to pull it off, and that we have this little touchstone of normalcy in weird times. I think it's huge for people. So I'm glad that they did what they did. I'm glad the NBA's doing what they did as well. I think, their bubble's pretty impressive too. MLB. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, it's interesting, they've managed to make it work. It's nice that we have that. for sure. And we still have the games.
We're not going to have a blank spot on the Stanley Cup that says no champion this season, or pandemic, or whatever it says for 19 back in 1918, 1919, whatever they inscribed on the cup that year. It's nice that that's not happening this year.
Exactly. We had this conversation the other day through text. I sent you a picture of my nephew, Gavin. He's very excited. He's starting high school, and he's going to your old high school, De La Salle High School in Ottawa. And he sort of auditioned or sent in photos he had taken and some stuff he had produced to get into the audio visual or digital stream, doing the kind of stuff that we're doing. And so this is the beginning of his life in that regard, in working towards that. And I told him, I said, well, I'm interviewing Mike Ross, and he's I told him what you did and stuff. And he was like, that is cool. And he goes, I want to listen to the podcast after that. And just the fact that he now goes to a school where you went there, you went through the same process, and here you are, you're part of the Toronto Maple Leafs family, and people know you, and you get to do all these great things. That's super cool for a young person to see that and know that other people around them have done that, because it always feels like those are people from some other place. They get to those jobs and get those opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it sort of comes back to some of the names that we've thrown out here today, right? I mean, you mentioned Tom Green. Mm-hmm. Tom Green, I mean, I remember Tom from just being around Ottawa back in those days when he was on Rogers, and then suddenly he's married to Drew Barrymore, and he's on the big screen. It's like, wait a minute. I remember that guy throwing, boxes of French fries over his shoulder at McDonald's at the Rideau Center, right? Like, I remember those days, right. and painting his parents' house and putting that on Rogers. And for me, I think about some of the people that I saw in media growing up, and I think of someone like Max Keeping, for example, longtime news anchor, Brian Smith, right? We just passed the anniversary 25th anniversary of his shooting in Ottawa.
Yeah,
and Brian, I put out. I mentioned on Twitter that day a few weeks back that there's a guy who had a tremendous influence on my career. I just started covering the NHL and was trying to get a coach from another team to stop and do a quick interview. And the guy could see that I was a young kid just starting out, and just pulled what I consider just such a typical old school move, where he just stopped, patted me on the head, and in front of everybody, sort of making a joke of me and saying, sorry, little buddy, I'm all done for today, and walking away. Mm-hmm. And Brian was standing about 20 feet further down the hallway, and this guy stopped to talk to Brian, and they were pals. And Brian said, before we talk, could you just talk to my friend over here for a couple of minutes? He just wants to do a quick interview with you. Mm-hmm. And that was Brian Smith standing up for me. Yeah, that was Brian Smith looking out for me,
looking out for peers too.
Right, right, and looking out for the next generation. Yeah. So that's why, to me, I never want to take myself too seriously, but I do want to take the role that the different roles that I have in my various broadcasting roles very seriously, and encourage the next generation, because to me, I've had so many great mentors over the years that have done everything they could to help me out. Like, I haven't run into too many people in this business that have tried to sort of keep me down or felt like the next generation was threatening them. Right. If anything, they felt like we need to make the next generation better. And that's certainly something that I live up to.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and that's a great attitude, and that's why, one of the many reasons that the Maple Leafs are lucky to have you as part of your team. So I wish you so many years of continued success with the Leafs. I hope you get to do this as long as you can and you want to, and you also get an opportunity to announce some games where at some point we get to lift the cup in our barn. And it's not watching some other team lift it in our barn. It's watching our team lift it in our barn, and that'll be exciting times. And I hope that you get an opportunity to do that. I think we'll get there. It's been a bumpy ride, but we're going to get there. We'll get there in the next few years.
I think we got the right people running the show. It takes time. Doesn't happen overnight. So I'm pretty confident that I've come along at the right time. And let's make this happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for your time. It was a real pleasure. You're a gentleman, and I can't wait to get back to Toronto and actually see a game up close and personal in the arena and hear those players calling each other's names out, because I miss that. I miss it a lot.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a real pleasure, and it's always nice to talk to somebody not only who has a lot in common with you with regards to what we do, but where we're from. And as I'm the voice of the Maple Leafs, but I'm from Ottawa, and my family's still there, and I've got some fantastic memories of growing up there and starting to develop my career there. So it's always great to share some stories there too.
Indeed. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mike. Cheers. Bet. Have a good one, brother. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
That wraps up episode 13, part 2. My thanks to Mike Ross for spending time with me and for sharing his cool story. Thanks again to Jerry Stamp, who wrote and performed the Cool Story theme song and all other jingles and stings that appear on the show. Do yourselves a favor and look for Jerry's music wherever you stream. And finally, thank you for listening. Until next time, pura vida.
Everybody's had some adventures. Everybody's had a few close calls. Everybody's got a story. What's yours?